Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic for this top 10? Top 10 Anoa'i family members, and I probably pronounced that wrong. I'm sorry if I did, but you know the family, you know the bloodline, you know the history. There have been dozens of wrestlers come out of this family, a lot of them making really big marks on the wrestling industry. With that being said, let's dive into my top 10, starting with our number 10, someone that married into the family, the Soul Man, Rocky Johnson. And Rocky Johnson's one of those people that I think when you're my age and probably a little bit older, you look at more fondly than people that didn't necessarily see his career. A lot of people just look at him as just the father of The Rock. But to me, he was so much more. When I first started watching wrestling, he was the tag team champion, or just won the tag team championships shortly after I started watching him and Tony Atlas. So they were the guys that, to me, stood out. And then he also had really great runs pretty much everywhere. Memphis, Florida. Florida, he was a 7-time heavyweight champion there, or six-time heavyweight champion. Memphis, he had great runs. He had great matches with Lawler down there. I mean, everywhere Rocky Johnson went, he was a star. And I don't think that people quite understand that because there's not a ton of stuff on the WWE network on him besides that he's The Rock's father. But Rocky Johnson, for people of my age and probably a little bit older, recognize how great of a star he really. Now going from that, number 9. Another person that also married into the family, that's Trinity Fatu, aka Naomi. Naomi, to me, is probably pound for pound the most talented women's wrestler the WWE has had. And she's been there, I believe, roughly 15, 16 years with a stint in TNA in the middle there, or closer to this side of her career. But she was always a stalwart. She always stood out. She was so athletically gifted. I think she was the most athletically gifted wrestler of her generation. And that's no knock on wrestlers like Beth Phoenix or Natalya, or Tamina Snuka, or anyone like that, or the Bellas, Paige, all of them. And she's carried that over into this new generation where we're seeing more and more hyper-athletic women coming in. Bianca Belair, Rhea Ripley, some of the women down in NXT who are insanely athletic. I think Naomi's kind of the template for that. And she was just amazing. She still is amazing. Even now, when we're seeing her have more character development, which we haven't necessarily seen throughout her entire career, it just makes her stand out even more. I think she's amazing, hence why she makes the list. Now going from that, our number 8. This is a guy that, unfortunately, if he would have lived a little bit longer, he could have made probably a good argument to be in the top 2 or 3, and that's Umaga. Umaga came along in a really weird era of wrestling where the wrestling business wasn't as popular as it was 5 to 10 years before he started and before he came in, and it wouldn't be as popular as it is today. And the sad thing about it is, Umaga came in and he was refreshing. He was a bit of a throwback, kind of the old way like the Wild Samoans were represented, or the Head Shrinkers, Samoan SWAT team were represented, but with a new coat of paint. He wasn't just a savage. He was Umaga. He was pretty much what you think of Jacob Fatu now is where Umaga was. He had that charisma. He had the amazing matches with guys like Cena. And I just thought he was awesome. Unfortunately, he passed away way too young. I think if he would have lived a little bit longer, he probably would have been a guy that we see in main event WrestleManias. Be a big, big star. Unfortunately, like I said, his career and his life were cut a little bit short. But rest in peace, Umaga. You were amazing. Now going from that, our number 7, Jimmy Uso. As of the time I'm recording this, he's kind of the Jannetty of the Uso brothers, and that's kind of a sad thing to say. He really has kind of got lost in the mix a little bit. I don't think he's quite caught his footing yet, but I don't think he's necessarily the Jannetty. When you look at it as a whole, the Usos as a tag team are going to go down as one of the great tag teams in WWE history, and probably a top 10 overall tag team. You have to rank them up there with teams like the Dudley Boys, the Road Warriors, Demolition, Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, just for the amount of success over the amount of time that they had. I mean, he's had 8 different tag team championships in WWE. I mean, he doesn't quite get the flowers that he deserves. And I do think at some point he's going to get back around to make himself something different. Some people, it just takes him a little bit longer, especially coming out of something as special as the Usos were. But I think Jimmy has the talent to do it. I think he's going to be something special. He will connect with the fans. He just needs to find his way there. Now, going from that, our number 6. We just talked about Jimmy. Let's talk about his brother, Main Event Jay. Everything I said about the tag team reigns of the Usos applies to Jay as well, Jay Uso. Then you add he had another reign as tag champion with Cody Rhodes, and he just won the Royal Rumble. He's going, at the time of this recording, he's going to wrestle Gunther for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. He's had an Intercontinental run under his belt, and he's arguably the most popular wrestler in the world right now. You could put him right in there in the mix with CM Punk, with Cody Rhodes, in an era where the WWE is making more money and selling out pretty much everywhere they go, having pay-per-views that are widely acclaimed as some of the best pay-per-views they ever put on. He is one of your big stars. His connection with the fans is almost unmatched. Like I said, I could hear the argument that he is the MVP of the WWE, that he's the most valuable player. He's a guy, again, for years and years, people didn't expect anything from the Usos if they ever split up. But Jay has proven there is life after a great tag team. If Jimmy is Jannetty, Jay is the Heartbreak Kid. And again, Jimmy, I know he's going to do better than he's right now. He's going to get there too. Just give him time. But as of right now, Jay is just this much ahead of him. And that might be the fire that pushes Jimmy into greatness himself, catching up to his brother. Now, going from that, our number 5. We talked about Jimmy. We talked about Jay. Let's talk about their daddy, Rikishi Fatu. Or just Fatu, or just Rikishi, or the Sultan. Rikishi is one of those wrestlers whose career is better than the championships that he had, whether it be as a part of the Samoan SWAT team, the Head Shrinkers, again, Rikishi. I wouldn't say the Sultan was the high point of his career, but he's a guy that when you look back for over a decade in different roles at different times, he was a main star wherever he was, whether it be WCW or WWE. He was a guy that the fans came out to see, kind of like you would think of Jay. To me, Rikishi had that same thing that Jay Uso had, that connection with the fans, and fans just loved him. That dance that he did was just amazing. His pairing with Too Cool was legendary, and as much as it's memed, his I Did It for The Rock is something that everybody remembers. I think Rikishi doesn't get the love he deserves. I think his impact is more than his championship reigns. And in any other family, he might be the top guy. But we're talking about one of the most historic families in wrestling history. So, unfortunately, he only makes it to number 5 here. But Rikishi was amazing. Definitely deserving to be on this list. Now, go from that, our number 4. We're putting a tag team here. And the little difference between this and the Usos, why I separated the Usos and not these guys, is because of Jay excelling after the breakup of the Usos. And the tag team I'm talking about here might be another one of those top 10 tag teams of all time, one of the great tag teams in the history of the sport. Afa and Sika, the Wild Samoans, whether it be WWF, whether it be NWA, whether it be Georgia, San Francisco, anywhere they went. These guys racked up tag team championships in any organization they were at. 3-time WWF tag team champions. Every company they ever wrestled for, they won the tag team championships with. They're one of those legendary teams. When you talk to people that were fans of wrestling in the 70s and early 80s, the Wild Samoans are one of those people that always come up. Whether they talk about Bruno Sammartino or Dusty Rhodes, or Superstar Graham, or the Funk Brothers, or if they're AWA fans, Nick Bockwinkel, they bring up the Wild Samoans, because the Wild Samoans were everywhere, and they were successful everywhere. They're such a great tag team, and one of the templates for everybody else on this list. I mean, so much history and so much legacy comes from the Wild Samoans. A lot of their gimmick was passed on to people like Umaga, like Rikishi when he was one of the Head Shrinkers. And yeah, it may not be the most politically correct gimmick nowadays. It might not sit well with fans if it was a brand new thing, but it's a product of its time. This is one of the most successful tag teams in the history of tag team wrestling. Like I said, I'd put them on the short list. Maybe add the Assassins in there, the Road Warriors, Freebirds, Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, the Dudley Boys, maybe throw in the Briscoe Brothers, both versions. I'd even say throw in the Young Bucks, even though people think that's a controversial pick. But anyway, I digress. One of the great tag teams of all time. You can't say Alpha without Sika, Sika without Alpha, hence why they're on the list together. Now going from that, our number 3. We talk about one of the legendary teams of all time. Now we're going to talk about one of the legendary big men of all time, and that's the mighty Yokozuna. When we break down this list, and if you ask me who my favorite wrestler on this list to watch is, it may be Yokozuna. He was a guy that when he first came into WWF, and the little bit I saw of him on AWA, I didn't really think much of him on AWA as Coquina Maximus. He was just another guy, in my opinion. And when he first come to WWF, I was just like, okay, here's another big guy. But then when you watch him wrestle and you see how he moved and how big he was. This wasn't a Haystacks Calhoun situation. This wasn't a King Kong Bundy, no disrespect to Bundy. This was a guy that can fly around the ring like someone like Jimmy or Jay Uso with an extra 300 pounds. Whether he's 5, 6, 700 pounds, he can move like no one else that size or anyone even close to that size. His super kick, in my opinion, is one of the best super kicks in the history of wrestling. I absolutely love watching Yokozuna matches. I love him as a wrestler. He came in a time where they were transitioning from the Hulk Hogan era to the New Generation era, and in my opinion, he was the main heel of that transfer. Like I said, probably my favorite guy on this list as far as a wrestler, solo-wise or tag-wise or anything like that. I loved his tag team with Owen Hart too. Yokozuna, rest in peace again. You were amazing. Now going from that, our number 2. Here's where the controversy is going to come. My number 2 member of the Anoa'i family, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. You heard that right. I said Dwayne. The final boss, Mr. The most electrifying wrestler, one of the stalwarts of the Attitude Era. If Stone Cold Steve Austin is the ace, Rock is also an ace. He's the ace minus, maybe. Arguably one of the biggest stars in wrestling history, one of the biggest movie stars in the world. But in my opinion, there is somebody that has surpassed him. And this is no knock on The Rock. I mean, The Rock is an 8-time WWE champion. Twice he won the WCW title. He's got several tag team titles, intercontinental titles. He's won the Royal Rumble. He's main evented WrestleMania after WrestleMania after WrestleMania. He's one of the iconic stars of one of the most iconic eras of wrestling. I mean, there's not much that you could say about The Rock that hasn't already been said. One of the best promos of all time, one of the best wrestlers of all time, one of the biggest movie stars in the world today. Just an awesome talent. That's why he's on this list. That's why he's number 2. Now, before we get to our number 1, we have a little thing we do here on our top 10 called the best of the rest. Basically, these were people that were thought of for the list but didn't quite make it. First up is a guy that, if I do this list in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, he might be number 1. And he's a guy that I've liked for a very long time. He was a big fish in a small pond for a very long time, and that's Jacob Fatu. When he was in MLW, he was the star of MLW. Whether it be when MJF was there, he outshined MJF, he outshined Hammerstone. I mean, he was the guy, and there is something so charismatic about him. Like I said with Umaga, and I mentioned it when I mentioned Umaga, he reminds me a lot of Umaga. To me, he's got all of the in-ring talent that Umaga had, with the connectability that Jey Uso has, with a promo ability that might not be as great as The Rock, but everything he says, he's kind of like an Eddie Kingston. Everything he says, you feel it. It feels real. It feels like it's coming from somewhere authentic. Kind of like a CM Punk hat. Again, like I said, if you ask me 5 to 10 years from now, when he's racked up a couple WrestleMania main events, a couple World Championship runs, he might be number 1. But as of right now, he just barely missed our top 10 list, but he was definitely considered. Last but not least on the best of the rest, the High Chief Peter Maivia. Now this might be a product of me not being able to see a ton of Peter Maivia's stuff. I've probably seen less than 20 matches of his total and maybe 15 promos total. I know his importance. I know what he means to wrestling. I've seen results of his, I've seen championships he's won, but I kind of can't really put him on the list ahead of some of these wrestlers on here. Yes, he won territorial championship. Yes, he was a main star in his home promotion. But when you look at people like, let's say, Rocky Johnson, his son-in-law, Rocky Johnson did it on a bigger stage. Yokozuna, Rikishi, Umaga, all these people did it on a bigger stage than Peter Maivia did. And yes, he did have some runs in WWE and NWA and such, but he was never a focal point. He was never a main event guy in those companies. So again, this may just be my lack of seeing him as much as some of these other wrestlers, but from the sample size I have, unfortunately I couldn't put him on the list. For his relevancy and for what he means to the family, he definitely deserved consideration. Now with that being said, before we get to our number one, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. Becoming a channel member would definitely help me out. With all that being said, our number one member of the Anoa'i family, fittingly, let's put our ones up for the original tribal chief, Roman Reigns. And if you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I would have told you were absolutely insane that I would have put Roman Reigns ahead of the Wild Samoan, Yokozuna, or The Rock. If you asked me this 7 years ago, he may not have even made the top 10. The transformation of Roman Reigns from the guy being forced down our throats to the head of the table, the tribal chief, is nothing short of spectacular. I've said this a million times and I'll probably say it a million more. The Bloodline storyline is one of the top maybe 5 wrestling stories, in my opinion, for its longevity, for the twists and turns it had, for it still being somewhat ongoing right now, for his long run as a champion. I mean, it's amazing and astounding what he did. And that was after he already probably had a Hall of Fame career. If you take away the Tribal Chief stuff, he's a Hall of Famer. You add the Tribal Chief run, and for me, it puts him on the top of this list. And he may not have the quote-unquote everyday person name value than a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has. He may not have been one of the guys in the Attitude Era like Dwayne was, or one of the focal points of the new generation like Yoko, but he was a flag bearer. And he was the guy that carried WWE, and he carried it through some of its most tumultuous times, through the pandemic, through the Vince McMahon scandals, and them breaking pretty much daily as he's the world champion, and as he's dominating. For me, he has raised himself above The Rock. That title run, the storyline, everything he's done, coming back from leukemia, fighting through that, I mean, I think he's the guy. And like I said, you asked me 5 years ago, he might be number 6, number 7 on this list. As of now, he's all the way at number 1. So let's do it one more time. Throw your ones up for your tribal chief, Roman Reigns. With all that being said, my name is George Coles. If you have a different idea of who should have been number 1, if you think I'm crazy for putting Roman above Dwayne, if you think maybe Yoko should have been number 1, if you think the Wild Samoan should have been number 1, even Peter Maivia. I know there are some of you guys that are a bit older than me that have seen more of Peter Maivia's career. Maybe you're going to tell me I'm crazy that Peter Maivia is just as good, if not better than all of these guys. I welcome that. Put it down here in the comments. Again, with all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching a Heel Heat Top 10.